All right, let's continue to examine the decision-making process here in Chapter 11 as we talk about what to do with multiple predictors. So hopefully you do have multiple predictors. You've been getting this message from me. Kind of the more the merrier, the more data that we have, the more likely we are to make a better decision. So what do we do with all this data now? So here you can see on this example before you, we have three predictors. We have an interview, an application blank, and a recommendation. So one thing that we might do is what's called a clinical prediction. And this really kind of still goes back to a manager's gut feel. So they look at these scores and then they kind of say, okay, I'm going to go with this candidate. Again, I'm not really in favor of that because, as I've mentioned previously, we're not very good rational decision makers. Our emotions get in the way and cloud our judgment. I prefer to really, as much as possible, to bank it on the data. So that kind of brings us up to our next way of doing this, and this is this unit weighting, where we say, in this example, we might say, we're going to just take them all, we're going to add them up, and whoever gets the highest score wins on that. And then we take it even a step further and we do a rational weighting where we look at one and we say, you know what, I think the interview is a little bit more important, so I'm going to weight that a little bit more heavily, and the recommendations, I don't really trust those, so I'm going to weight those lower, and I'll put the application bank somewhere in the middle. So we put those factors on front of that, do the math, and again come out with a highest scoring candidate that way. The most sophisticated way to do that is to do this with a multiple regression test. And if you recall before, I said that many of these predictors are components of one another, so they're not truly additive. Well, when you go through a multiple regression analysis, you can figure out exactly what portion of a factor is a predictor in the overall success. And you can take those weightings, add it to the y-intercept, which is designated by A here, add those together and get a score that way. Most people don't do that. I will tell you, I am happy if truly we get to the point in our selection process where we are using valid, reliable predictors, and we're looking at the numbers and the data there. That's just so much far ahead of where most organizations are, that I'm thankful for that. If you can get to a point where you're doing multiple regression, I'm really quite pleased with that. That doesn't happen too often. So again, as you're doing this, you have to ask yourself a few questions. Do the decision makers have considerable experience and insight into selection decisions? If they don't, maybe you're going to need to do some education there. You're going to have to figure out a strategy to help get the best people in there. Is managerial acceptance of the selection process important? I'd like to answer that question for you. The answer is yes, it is. It is so important to have the hiring managers make those decisions and not an HR staff, because if the HR staff makes a selection decision, then the manager points to you as the problem if this employee doesn't work out. When they make the decision, first of all, they have buy-in to helping that employee succeed, and if they don't work out, then they can only blame themselves for that. Is there reason to believe that each predictor contributes relatively equally to job success? The answer to that one is usually no, of course not. Some things are going to be more important, and again, you need to look at your current employees to help you make that decision. Are there adequate resources to use involved weighting schemes? Usually I would say the answer to that is yes. It doesn't take that much time to come up with at least some simple metric to select candidates. And are conditions under which multiple regression is superior satisfied? You certainly need enough employees, enough data to get valid statistics out of a multiple regression analysis. So you have to figure that in. Again, many organizations use this multiple hurdle model for selecting candidates. If you make it through the resume, then you get into some sort of phone screening test. take that to an interview, reference check, and then of course you make your decisions. Again, if you combine this compensatory and multiple hurdles model together, in each step there, you're going to have weights, you're going to have predictors, and you're going to have weights on those to help weed out that process. One word of warning, be careful, especially early on, about those weightings. You don't want to inadvertently weed out good candidates in that process.